Hey, has anybody else been wondering if at some point recently, like all the decision makers around the Kanawha Valley got together and decided to just do every road project they've ever thought of at the same time? It was like, did you all like get together and you're like, you know what we'd like to do? We'd like to see if we could make everyone miserable for about 5 years. You can't go anywhere. It's absolutely everywhere, and I get it. It's for the good of the roads and all of us. I'm thankful, but as soon as they get done with it, they're just going to start something else. Also, it's like it's never ending. One night, I was driving home, and the exit I wanted to get off on the interstate was closed. I'm like, what do you mean it's closed? That's my way home. They're like, no, it's closed. You have to go a different direction. Like, you got to be kidding me right now. I got to drive all the way down to the next exit, turn around, and come back. Like that, I was like, there's no way. You can't just close an exit. There's a bunch of people that live here. But they do. And they go, sorry, you're not coming any further. They just, sorry, go a different way. They just redirect you. How many of us, though, that sort of thing has happened in more meaningful areas of our life quite a bit also? Right, like you were going somewhere, you thought that this relationship was headed in a certain direction. You thought your job or your company was headed in a certain direction. You thought, oh man, we found the perfect house that we want to live in. Whatever it was, and you thought that you were headed right where you wanted to go, and then you get the rejection letter. You get the rejection notice. You get the no, sorry, this isn't going to work out. You ever been there before? It hurts, doesn't it? It's really confusing, especially whenever you're like, man, I felt like God was leading us into this season. I thought God led us into this relationship. I thought God led us into this job or to starting this business or this ministry, and it's not going the way that we thought it was. It gets very, very confusing and very hurtful. You start going, like, am I the problem? How could I have heard God so wrong? Like, how can we have gotten it so wrong? Whenever we get rejected, it really, really hurts and makes us question quite a bit. In fact, this happened to me whenever I was in high school. The church we attended was having a Valentine's Day dinner for the students of the youth group, and I had a girlfriend at the time, and I had asked her to go to the Valentine's Day dinner with me, and I call her after school, hey, what time do you want me to pick you up for the Valentine's Day dinner? She goes, sorry, I'm going to the mall with my friends tonight. I said, what? It's Valentine's Day. We had plans. And that was it. And I was like, how could I thought that this thing was going so well. And only to be rejected. Only to be sent into a different direction. It was very confusing. It was very hurtful. Here's the question I want to ponder today, though. Some of you, I already know from first service, some of us, we've been around for a while. So you already know the answer to this question. Some of us, we haven't quite got there yet, and that's this. Is there any chance that rejection could be a good thing? I mean, we know it hurts like crazy. We know that it creates confusion and doubt, and we go, man, I don't even know if I know how to hear the voice of God after that. But I know some people, they told me in between services, they're like, yeah, I think the answer is yes. I want to dive into it today. I want to know, is there a possibility that it could be good? Like, could rejection be protection sometimes? I think absolutely it could. Could rejection be, could it have a greater purpose than what we thought? Could it be, just, all of us, we're here in a room, I assume on some level, perhaps you have a faith in something beyond humanity. You might not be all the way into the Jesus thing yet, but could it be that there is someone behind even the painful things in our life that allows them to be for our good? I think that it's possible, because if we're being honest, you and I, especially me, maybe not you so much, but definitely me, have a tendency to make bad decisions. And sometimes we need something beyond ourselves to step in and say no for us since we don't know how to say no to ourselves. Sometimes we need an outside source. You know, those times that you've gotten that outside source, it might have hurt, but you're like, I actually came to appreciate that. Like I remember when I was in middle school, I decided I wanted frosted tips like all the cool guys in my grade. I know, it's hard. I used to have hair, and it was great hair, by the way. I wanted the frosted tips, and what happened was the guy did it wrong. He pulled too much hair through the little cap, so I ended up with these gigantic circles all around my head. I looked like a cheetah. And so at that point, the only option was to go for the Slim Shady look and completely, it was horrible. It was horrible. Listen, middle school was hard enough without making choices like that. We used to have to go into the gym first thing in the morning to wait for homeroom to start. I had to walk by everyone in my school, they're yelling at me, horrible, only things middle schoolers would say. At that moment, I certainly wish there had been someone that would have said no. I wish I had had an outside force go, you know what, Scott, that's probably not going to go good for you. Right? I had that actually also in middle school. In 6th grade, I made maybe it wasn't a mistake, but it felt like a mistake in the moment because it really hurt. I asked the pretty girl in my homeroom class what she thought of the way that I dressed. She said, it was horrible because I wore half-naked men on my shirts. Let me catch you up. I was a big fan of professional wrestling. And it never occurred to me that wearing shirts with dudes in underwear might be a fashion faux pas. I'm glad she said that. I didn't wear it ever again after that. I didn't know. Sometimes we need to be saved from ourselves. So sometimes rejection really can. Sometimes hearing what hurts can actually be a good thing. So I want to jump into a sermon today titled The Blessing of Rejection. The Blessing of Rejection. We're back in 1 Samuel. We're in chapter 29. If you'll remember last week, the first couple verses of 28, the battle lines were being drawn up between the Israelites and the Philistines for this big final battle. We know that King Saul is finally coming to an end. He's going to meet his maker very, very soon in this story. But we see the battle lines are drawn up. And if you'll remember, David is in a really difficult spot because he's been kind of playing double agent in the Philistines area, being protected by them while also plundering the Philistine cities and telling the king that he was actually plundering the Israelite cities. So he's in quite the predicament whenever the battle lines are drawn up. 1 Samuel 29, beginning in verse 1, says this: the entire Philistine army now mobilized at Aphek, and the Israelites camped in the spring in Jezreel. As the Philistine rulers were leading out their troops in groups of hundreds and thousands, David and his men marched near the rear with King Achish. Here's what's going on. The Philistines are going out to fight King Saul and the Israelites. But remember, David has been living in Philistine territory. So last chapter, King Achish said, hey, when we go out to battle, David, you do know that you've got to come and fight for us. Which is going to create an issue, and here's the issue. If David goes to fight with the Philistines, he will never become king of Israel. If he gets into the battle and flips his loyalties to Israel, the Philistines will kick him out and send him back into dangerous territory where Saul and his men can come after him. He is in an unwinnable situation. If he fights on this side, it's going to be bad. If he fights on this side, it's going to be bad. And it even says that they were in the back of everyone. They were bringing up the rear of the company. That's a bad place for someone to be that really doesn't fit in. Verse 3 says this: but the Philistine commanders demanded, what are these Hebrews doing here? And Achish the king told them, this is David, the servant of King Saul of Israel. He's been with me for years, and I've never found a single fault in him from the day he arrived until today. Now remember, David is a double agent. King Achish thinks he is fully surrendered to him, all the while he has been plundering the cities of the Philistines. He's doing a very good job at fooling King Achish. However, the Philistine commanders, I got to be honest, I'm with them on this. I don't want people going into battle with me that I can't trust. I don't want people, especially if they're bringing up the rear. That's how you get stabbed in the back pretty quick. I'm with the commanders on this. I see why it is that they had an issue with David. Like in their mind, they're going, this guy doesn't belong here. He's not one of us. I'll be honest, this is how it feels a lot of times, because I hope you know this. If you're new, you'll get to know. I'm from Charleston, so I got the blessing of doing ministry right where I did all my mistakes as well. So sometimes people will walk in on a Sunday and they'll be like, I don't know that he belongs here. That's kind of how David and them felt like, that's how the commanders felt about David. They're like, yeah, that guy doesn't belong here. This group of people, this isn't their place. They're not supposed to be here. And I'm definitely not letting them come back here all the way in the back where we can't see them. We're not going to let this happen. Verse 4 says this, but the Philistine commanders were angry. Send him back to the town you've given him, they demanded. He can't go into battle with us. What if he turns against us in the battle and becomes our adversary? That's a very real possibility. I think had David been forced to go into battle, I think that's what he would have done. Is there any better way for him to reconcile himself with his masters than by handing our heads over to him? Isn't this the same guy? I love this. Isn't this the same David from whom the women of Israel sing in their dances, that Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s? They're going, King Achish, this is the guy that when the ladies are singing their songs, they say that he's killed tens of thousands of us. And you want us to march into battle with him behind us where we can't see him. Yeah, I'm with them. They're going, no, absolutely not. He's not coming with us. So in essence, they're going, we are saying no to David. We're rejecting David. I don't care if you vouch for him. We're rejecting David. Now, there's two reasons why people are rejected, right? We all know this inherently. I'm going to put some categories. You go, oh, yeah, we get this. There's two reasons. There is valid reasons. There is invalid reasons, right? Somebody ever break up with you and you go, that's not even true. You lost a job and you're like, well, that's not how things are. You lost a friendship. They said horrible stuff about you. And you're like, whoa, wait a second. Where did that even come from? There's going to be things in your life that people are going to reject you and say no to you for invalid reasons. And I've got horrible news for you today. You can do nothing about that. It doesn't matter how much you defend yourself, how many Facebook posts you make. It doesn't matter how much you fight, fuss, whatever. If they have invalid reasons, the only thing that you can do is allow God to vindicate you. Allow God to be the one to show that you're not in the wrong. That's all you can do. If they have invalid reasons. But to be honest, the commanders of the Philistine armies have pretty valid reasons. They don't know, but they have a good reason to not trust David. And when there's really valid reasons why you get rejected, because I don't want you to walk away from today's sermon and going, all blessing or all rejection is blessing. No, sometimes you screw it up and you're just paying the penalty for what you did. Right? So if the reason is valid, the best thing you can do is learn from it. Learn from it, own what you did, seek to change it in the future. So you have invalid and valid reasons. This is a little bit of a mixture here with David because the commanders are rejecting him on invalid reasons because they don't know that he's a double agent, but really it was valid because he was a double agent. Right? Like for me, if you want a valid rejection looked like this. When I was a sophomore in high school, most of my friends were seniors, and it was a big group of guys, and some of them I was friends with, and other ones of them I made fun of. And on one particular weekend, the ones that I made fun of were having a birthday party or some sort of party at somebody's house, and I rode with the friends that I didn't make fun of, showed up at the house, they went up, they said, hey, Scott's with us, can he come to the party? They said, absolutely not. Why? Because he does nothing but make fun of us. I'm rejected. And in that moment I go, yeah, they got a point. I did do that. Lesson learned, moved on. Learn your lesson and move on. You did something wrong. Don't do that in the future. Right? If it's invalid, if it's not true, you're going to have to trust God to vindicate you. Verse 6 says this. So Achish, the king, finally summoned David and said to him, I swear by the Lord that you have been a trustworthy ally. I think you should go with me into battle, for I've never found a single flaw in you from the day you arrived until today, but the other Philistine rulers won't hear of it. I mean, he's very, very persuasive, apparently. David is very persuasive because Achish is like, I vouch for this guy fully. Go to verse 7. It says, please don't upset them, but go back quietly. I mean, he's completely fooled. However, he is sending David home. Sorry, you're not welcome here. You can't go into battle with us. They've all said no to you. Verse 8. What have I done to deserve this treatment? David demanded. What have you ever found in your servant that I can't go and fight the enemies of my lord the king? Now, here's what I think's going on. I think David is putting on a pretty good show. Because I think that he knows that if he goes into this battle, he's either going to have to fight against Israel or with Israel, and either way, it's not going to go good for him. So it's kind of one of those things, it's like, oh no, I guess we'll just go home. And he kind of dodges a bullet, because now he's not going to be forced to make that decision in this moment. It's kind of remarkable that it happens that way. What we could say is, in this moment, rejection was actually the best thing for David. Rejection was actually the best thing for David. For them to say no to him was actually the best thing, because he was in a situation that he could not get out of on his own. If he had just decided, yeah, no, I can't go to battle with you, king, he would have known that he was a traitor. He couldn't get out of this situation on his own. So rejection was actually what was best for him. Verse 9 says this, but Achish insisted, as far as I'm concerned, you're as perfect as an angel of God, but the Philistine commanders are afraid to have you with them in the battle. Now get up early in the morning and leave with your men as soon as it gets light. And so David and his men headed back to the land of the Philistines while the Philistine army went on to Jezreel. So David packs up, goes home rejected. And we're stuck with this question. Can rejection be a blessing? Can rejection be a blessing? See, David accepts the rejection and goes home because he knows that it's good for him. But how do we get to that place? Because when we get rejected, we get crushed. We're hurt, we're confused, we've got more questions than answers. How is it that David could get rejected and deals with it such in a healthy manner, but that's not normally how we are able to do it? Here's what all of 1 Samuel, ever since David shows up on the scene, there's been a comparison between King Saul, the king of Israel, who has been an abject failure, and the future king of Israel, David. There's been a comparison going on. And the thing that has always separated David from Saul was that David actually did trust God. Saul was disobedient to God because he didn't really trust him. David was obedient time and time and time again because he actually trusted God. And when you really actually trust God, you can take rejection as a blessing. You can know that there's something more beyond yourself, even when it doesn't make sense. You have to understand, King Achish, as the king, if he said David and his men could fight, they could fight. He was in charge. But for some reason, he goes, I trust you, but I'm still going to send you home. See, there's something weird going on there. It almost seems like there is something beyond Achish's power that is forcing him to send David home. Here's what David knew. David trusted in the sovereignty of God. The sovereignty of God. And that's a big church word, and to be honest, I think it's very misunderstood. I think it's very misunderstood. And one of the reasons why, if you were raised around the church back in the 90s, there was this song that everyone would sing from a lady named Twyla Paris. It was called God is in Control. Anybody remember God is in Control? Wow, okay. So she would sing this song, God is in Control. And about 10 years ago, one of my ministry mentors, I heard him preach in a sermon, and he was saying, that song right there is theologically inaccurate. I said, the song that we sang in church growing up? What do you mean? He goes, I think that the sovereignty of God displays not that he is in control, but that he is in charge. And there is a drastic difference between God being in charge and God being in control. I said, okay, so explain that to me. He said, think of it like a basketball game. A basketball game has rules that are set by people that are not the player. Absolutely. God has set the rules for the game. Me and you, we do not get to decide the rules for the game. Why? Because God is sovereign. That same rule setter is enforced by the referee, that at any point that he wants to step in and alter the game, change the rules of the game, interfere with, he is more than welcome within his rights to do so, because the referee is in charge. However, the referee is not the one that gets to choose who gets the ball. What's this mean? That means that you have free will to make choices. God is not micromanaging your choices whatsoever. However, that does not mean that because God is in charge that he can't step in, and despite whatever it is that seems insurmountable, that he can't step in and actually rescue you from a situation. He is in charge. Sure, you're making free will decisions, but God is ultimately in charge. And at the moment he wants to step in and alter the course of history, he's more than welcome to do so. At the minute that he wants to step in and heal somebody, he can stop the game, and that's what he can do. At the minute that he wants to protect you by having someone else tell you no, he's more than welcome to do that within his sovereignty. Right, so that's how, and this is what David knew about God. All right, I'll leave, because if I'm not meant to fight in this battle, then it's probably for my good. God can somehow use rejection as a redirection. Just like when I couldn't get off the interstate, that was rejection, and it redirected me a different way. I ultimately got where I needed to go, but I was rejected and then redirected. You know the story of Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs worked at Apple and got thrown out of the company. We don't want you around here anymore. So he goes on, he starts his own company called Next, and then goes and buys a company from George Lucas that you might have heard of before, Pixar. So listen to what this means. That means if Steve Jobs had not been rejected by Apple initially, we wouldn't have Buzz and Woody. That's not a world I want to live in. But it was the rejection. And then after that, he gets to come back to Apple and put phones in all of your all's pockets to spy on you. But it was rejection. He got redirected, and ultimately, when you get rejected and redirected, then you can ultimately get to where you need to be. It can be a good thing. I was thinking about this past week. I told you I got rejected for the Valentine's Day dinner. And I know it'll be hard to believe, but that wasn't the only rejection I ever got from a young lady growing up. But every rejection led me to the greatest relationship I have with my wife now. Right? Every time that you got fired from a job or said no in an interview, it got you ultimately to where you are right now. And you might be in the midst of it and go, well, that hasn't happened to me yet. Just keep holding on. Just keep holding on. You don't know the end of the story yet. Every rejection can be a redirection to get you exactly where God wants you to be. I've told this story tons of times. About a decade ago, I went and interviewed at a church in Ohio that I was more than qualified to get that job. In fact, I left the interview and told Megan, I said, I'm getting that job. Only to get an email a week later that said, we're sorry, we're going with the other candidate. And I was crushed. Had no clue. However, now I look back 10 years later, I said, if I had ended up at that church, I would not be here doing what it is that God has me doing right now. It was a rejection that hurt like crazy and really damaged my ego. That redirected me ultimately to the thing God had for me. This is what he can do. So maybe it didn't work out in that relationship. Maybe that business didn't work out, that job didn't work out. Maybe that dream home didn't work out. Maybe that friend group didn't work out and you feel rejected and you're hurt and you're confused or whatever it is. It may be a redirection to get you where God wants you to be. It may take a while to get there, but what if God was using the rejection as a way of getting you right to where he needed you to be so that he could use you for his purposes? Here's the beautiful thing. Even though it still hurts, even though we end up with questions and we start to distrust ourselves and we've got doubts and all of this, the answer to the question is yes. Rejection can be a blessing. Rejection can be a blessing. And you know the really good thing about God being in charge also is it doesn't matter how bad you screw things up. You cannot thwart the will of God. You might royally mess it up. You might feel like, man, all of this rejection and no's and all of this, how in the world, how could God be in this? Listen, no matter what, the will of God will come to pass. And you will not stand in his way any more than a fly could stand in the way of a train. So you might have screwed it up. You might have got rejected. It might hurt. His will goes forth. Let me tell you another time that rejection ended up being a blessing. Isaiah 53 was written 700 years before the life of Christ. And the prophet Isaiah wrote this verse. He said that he, talking about Jesus, was despised and rejected. And it was actually because Jesus was despised and rejected that they arrested him on false charges, that they killed him and laid him in a tomb, only for God to vindicate him on the third day, proving that he really was everything that he said that he was. And because Jesus was rejected, you can now know your Father in heaven. You can now have your sins forgiven. You can now be made into a new creation in Christ. Because Jesus was rejected, you can be accepted. If you've never received that, never accepted that, today is that day for you. Time to say yes to the forgiveness of your sins and be made into a new creation. If you're struggling with some sort of rejection and you've been hurt and you're wondering, God, how could you ever bring good out of this? Just spend the next song just asking God to minister to you. It may not all be better in the next 5 minutes, but you can start the process to understanding how God might be bringing out good out of the rejection, out of your pain, out of the heartache, out of the questions and the doubt. Ask God how he's going to redeem all that for good, because that's what he does. So yeah, rejection can be a blessing.